Hello, and welcome to the video for our paper ADHD and Technology Research, investigated by Neurodivergent readers. My name is Katta Spiel, and I'm with TU Wien, and I speak with my co-authors Eva Hornecker, Bauhaus Uni Weimar, Rua M. Williams from Purdue University, and Judith Good, University of Amsterdam. This work is presented at CHI 2022 and is funded in part by the FWF Austrian Science Fund under the number T1146G. You might wonder, what is this all about? Why do we need this? Why are you doing this? Well, we are 4 researchers in human-computer interaction, and we all 4 happen to have ADHD. And we were wondering, how does the field of technology research generally think about ADHD and conceptualize the condition? But before we start, let's clear up a few concepts. First, neurodiversity, which refers to the diversity of neurological makeups across populations and emphasizes the diversity of cognitive processing or cognitive styles. It kind of rejects the labeling of neurotypes as deficit or impairment, by which we mean, yes, most people might be neurotypical, but we need that kind of variety of people which are labeled with conditions to kind of function as humanity. One of the neurodivergent conditions you might find is ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We don't really like how the term disorder qualifies people, so we only use the abbreviation for the time being. Anyway, ADHD is officially characterized by hyperactivity, impulsivity, and inattention, but it's better described as a difference in sensory processing and meaning-making about the world. And we want to remind our audience that it doesn't change when people become adults. ADHD is nothing you grow out of. ADHD is fundamentally rooted in a brain's neurology. And finally, critical disability studies, which provided us with a lens for our research. That means we wanted to understand how ADHD is conceptualized as a disability within these works, how people talk about this, and then further understand the implications of these concepts on the technological artifacts that are built. So we looked at all the papers that are in the ACM Digital Library Guide to Computing Literature and concern themselves with ADHD in one way or another. And we read those papers and then did some inductive and deductive coding alongside notions of who participated in the research, how did authors conceptualize disability, what was the research framing and disciplinary embedding, and what were technological aspects of the resulting prototypes and technologies. We collected our corpus in 2019 and then extended it with papers published since in 2021. However, in our core corpus, we had 66 papers, of which half were pretty short. Think about the old SIGCHI extended abstract format. That to us indicates that there is a lot of exploratory work out there, but not necessarily long-term projects that make it into a full paper stage. Topic-wise, most of the papers dealt with intervention or therapy. That is 31 papers. Another 14 then looked into technological approaches to diagnosis, whereas 4 only used ADHD as a narrative to discuss any kind of other technology not related to ADHD, and 3 were more abstract or general. What really struck a chord, though, was how these papers talked about ADHD. First of all, it's supposedly something individuals have to suffer from. Also, several authors distinguish between ADHD participants and so-called healthy participants. But not just that, it's also framed as a burden to others. And that one hurt because it's a bit on the nose on some deep down fears when papers focus on how ADHD folks can have a huge emotional and economic impact on families. And in that regard, taking us as a problem to be fixed but not actually addressed, as in a narrative token, is almost preferable, albeit rude. You see, in all this, we had feelings, and let me interject here briefly as to why our emotional responses are part of our work. Well, technically, there is also the thing with impulse control, but in this case, we used it strategically, because we think most of these researchers are not aware of the pitfalls they fall in when using such language, that they are talking about colleagues and people, but reducing them to case studies and objects to be studied due to their undesirable embodiment, reducing us to our undesirable embodiment. The effective responses illustrate the interpersonal harm this can and might cause, and serve as a reminder that technological design should be humane, particularly when it comes to marginalized groups. But back to our analysis. Turns out, when conducting design work in any kind of user-centered way, which already wasn't a lot, people love collaborating with literally any expert who doesn't have ADHD before engaging a person with ADHD. We are right here. Of course, inside and outside perspectives might differ and meaningfully speak to each other in productive ways, but for that, people need to bring in the inside perspective as well, and not completely leave it out. No wonder then that when ADHD participants were involved, largely as testers, they exhibited what we call embodied resistance. For example, I quote from one of the papers, begin quote, "The data from the user study was unreliable because the children found it hard not to fiddle with the EDA electrodes." End quote. Hence, ADHD children in digital sensor apparatus both out themselves through hyperactivity while simultaneously concealing the detail of their own biosignals, disrupting the efficacy of algorithmic feature extraction and classification. And by the way, the technologies that are created are mostly wearables, EEG related, or in smartphones, and sometimes augmented in virtual reality. However, their foci are largely on disciplining ADHD, which largely means suppressing traits, which is damaging to mental health in the long term. And specific purposes we identified lie in controlling body movements, as in reminding people to sit still with the same effect. And also in diagnosing the disordered, as in the search for automating classification of biomarkers, completely ignoring any kind of psychological diagnostic criteria, which also consider, for example, individual support needs. We recommend involving people with ADHD in research about them, but also for technologists to look at concepts like cryptechnoscience, which centers the work of disabled people as knowers and makers, is committed to access as friction, as well as interdependence as political technology, and finally, disability justice. For now, though, thank you for engaging with our work on behalf of myself and my co-authors.